Yesterday we started talking about we were earlier in the simon we were talking about measuring, using measures of volume, and now we're talking about measurements of weight. And the Rav Shulchan Aruch divides them into two separate sections, just because they have different details, but essentially it's the same halacha about having proper weights and measures. So we're going to run through some of the points. I'm going to skip Sif Yud Gimel because it's very technical about a balance scale and how high it has to be from the ceiling, how high it has to be from the ground, and how long the horizontal bar has to be, and the strings that attach to the horizontal bar to hold the cups that weigh, that hold the weight on one side and the goods on the other side. So I'm going to skip that, but let's just look at Sif Yud Beis. Hachenveni sheshokel dover lach kebasar v'chayotze bo. If a shopkeeper sells commodities that have moisture in them, such as meat, so what happens is that the liquid from the meat will get on the surfaces of the scale. And so therefore, tzarich lekaneach hamoznayim b'chol pam sheshokal. He has to wipe off the scales with a towel or something like that, with a shmata, every time he weighs a new customer's goods. Mipnei shahalechus nidvak bahem umachbidan, because the liquid from the previous customer may have a residue on it for the new customer, and therefore it's going to weigh down the commodity. That's why, when you go to the butcher or the bakery, they put down a piece of wax paper so that they don't have to wipe down the scales each time. V'hamishkol shehu keneged dover lach, v'hu mislach lech biyadav hameluchlachos. And you have to do the same thing on the other side of the balance scale when you when you put down the weight. And the reason is because that too gets dirty with the butcher's dirty hands. O b'moznayim, or through the scales. And so therefore, when it comes to the weight and it comes to the rest of the scales that can get wet, those don't come in direct contact with liquid as frequently, and therefore tzarich lekancho pam echas b'shavua. So those only have to be wiped down once a week. But for the actual part of the scale where the meat touches, you have to wipe it down in between each customer. Okay, so we're going to skip Yud Gimel. Again, it's very technical as far as the commodities that you're selling, the length and the height of the balance scale. So it's really not a practical halacha for our world today. Sif Yud Daled reiterates the halacha that you have to always give a little bit more in favor of the customer. Makom shenagu lishkol ayin ba'ayin velo lahachriya klum. If they sell, if it's a place where, when you have a balance scale, there are two different customs with the balance scale. One custom is to, when you're weighing with the balance scale, is to, when you sell, let's say you have a 1 pound weight on one side and you have a pound of meat on the other side. So in order to give the customer the benefit, you allow the side with the meat on it to go a little bit below the side with the weight on it. And that way you know that the customer is getting a little bit more. So if the minhag of your place is for the balance scales to remain equal and completely horizontal with each other, so tzarech lahosif echad mimeya bedavar halach ve'echad midalid meyos bedavar yavesh. So like we said before, then you have to add manually 1% for wet goods and 1/4% for dry goods. Kamoshin isbar b'minos, like we talked about when we talked about selling things by volume. And the way that we know this is shenemar even shalema v'tzedek yelach. There should be a complete weight and a righteous weight. And that word righteous weight was, remember we said, is extraneous. And therefore from there we learn sadek mishalach v'tein lo, that you have to take a little bit of your own, like from the word tzedakah, and give it to him. Umakam shenagu lahachriach chayev lahachriach tefach b'minei machal umashke. And if the minhag is, instead of manually giving the customer an extra 1 or 1/4 of 1%, but rather what these merchants do is that when you have the balance scale, they allow the side with the goods to go a little bit lower than the side with the weight on it. So the difference between the two should be 1 tefach. 1 tefach is 4 inches. So you have to let the differential to be 4 inches from one side to the other as far as their height. And that's with all kinds of food and beverages. Aval bishar dvarim hayikarim dai b'hachra mu'etes. But if you're selling more valuable commodities, right, not just consumable goods, but let's say jewelry, gold, things, precious metals, things like that. So then, if you were to let the scales have that differential, you'd be giving the customer too much. So you don't have to, just the slightest little differential is sufficient. And provided that provided that it's 1/4% differential. And anything that you're selling that is less than 1 litra, let's say a kilo of whatever the good is, then you don't need to do this kind of hachra'ah because it's a small amount. And if you were to have that 4-inch differential, that would be too much because it's a very small item, and so you're giving away too much to the customer, and so you just need to let the scales be slightly imbalanced from one side to the other. Tesvav. Now, hayeshokel yud litros ein tzarich lishkol litra v'hachra'ah. If you're selling a fellow 10 litras, let's say 10 kilos or 10 pounds of an item, you don't have to weigh each one individually. Remember, we learned before, it all depends on the proper minhag, whatever the convention is. But if there is no convention, and a guy asks you for 10 pounds or 10 kilos, you don't have to weigh each kilo separately. But rather you can weigh all of them together. The 10 pounds would be on one side of the balance scale, and a 10-pound weight will be on the other side, and then you can just do that 1 tefach differential for the entire amount. Even though you're giving the customer a little bit more, it's not as much as you would be giving him if you weighed each pound separately. Hayeshokel gimel revi'as litra ein sarach lishkol revia v'hachraos. If you're weighing 3/4 of a litra, let's say 3/4 of a pound, or 3/4 of a kilo, so then you don't have to weigh each quarter kilo separately. Ela yishkol lo litra v'yitain revia litra b'chaf shnia im habasar. But one option that you have is that, let's say you only have a 1/4 pound weight and a 1 pound weight. So what you can do is that you can take the 1 pound weight, put it on one side, take the 1/4 pound weight, put it on the other side, together with the meat that you're weighing out for the customer. And that's how you can end up with selling the customer 3/4 of a pound, or 3/4 of a kilo. V'lo yitain chatzi litra u'revia litra b'chaf echas. But what you should not do is put two weights on one side of the scale, like a half a kilo weight and a 1/4 kilo weight. And the reason he says you shouldn't do that is she'im tater lo lasos kein yesh locho sheyarim b'yapel revia halitra min hakafa lo yira lokeach. We're worried about deceptive practices, because who knows? Since there's multiple weights on one side, maybe the seller will accidentally, intentionally remove the smaller weight without the knowledge of the customer, because he sees that there's weights already on the scale. He doesn't know that the guy took off the smaller weight at the last second. And so therefore you have to be careful with that, and it's better to try and be innocent in the eyes of all the people that are there. Right? So therefore better not to have two weights on one side, but rather you can figure out how to do it mathematically by having only one weight on each side. Okay, let us go further. Tes Zayin. Kasha, onshon shel midos umishkol, yoser mishel arayos. we had seen this before, that the penalty, you mean the punishment that a person stands to incur for false weights and measures, is greater or is heavier than sexual crimes. She'i efshar limdod lemoded o l'shokel sheker l'shuv b'teshuva haguna ibnei shagazel es harabim. He says because there's no way for a person who has had in his store a false scale, um, he can't really do full tshuva because what he's done is he's stolen from the public. The Eina Yodeya Lemi Yachzor, and there's no way for him to know exactly from whom he's stolen and how much he's stolen from each customer. Sha'af sha'amru yaseh b'hem tzarchei rabim inzu tshuva haguna. Now the rabbis did give an option, and they said that if you've stolen from the public, so take the money that you can estimate that you've stolen and do public works with it, right? Remember we talked about this yesterday, that one of the ways that you can make restitution to when you've taken something from the public is to do public works with it, contribute to the community mikveh or the community whatever. The chayavin rashi, but that's not a complete tshuva, because you're not making full restitution. You're just doing your best. The chayavin rashi hakol lahamid memunim shiyu mechazrim ala chanuyos. He says, and the heads of the community really have to appoint officers or deputies who have been appointed by the Beis Din to go to all of the stores and to check their scales and make sure that everyone is on the up and up. And anyone who has in his store a faulty scale or a faulty measuring instrument, lahakoso, they should take the guy out into the city square and give him lashes, ulakanso kinira beinehim, and to penalize him as they see fit in their eyes. Ah, the good old days when rabbis had real power. Ah, can you imagine the rabbi going out and saying, "Oh, flog that guy. He's not weighing out the goods carefully for his customers. Needs to be flogged." Right? So obviously this is not something that we have authority over today. We don't flog anyone anymore anyway for having false weights and measures, but we can. That's why there's governmental law. One of the things that our sages tell us in the Mishnah, in Pirkei Avos, is having mispalal b'shloma shel malchus. There's an obligation in halacha even to pray for the welfare of the government, right? And why is there a halachic obligation to pray for the welfare of the government? Because without governmental authority, people would swallow each other up alive. That's what the Mishnah says, and that's why we need government, whether it's a Jewish government or a non-Jewish government. We need people in positions of authority. Otherwise, the world descends into lawlessness.
Unfortunately, Rabbi, we can see what's happening in the States.
I was just going to say, look, when you defund the police and you don't arrest criminals for petty theft because you're going to get in trouble for it, so then look what happens. It's anarchy ensues, and there's loss of property and loss of life, and it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing at all. Okay, so let's just maybe we'll look at a little bit at the Imrei Yaakov for just a second. The Imrei Yaakov in Tezayin says it's even worse than sexual crime. Mishal Arayas. Dehem chatoim beino uvein hamakom yisbarach shmo. Sexual crime is a crime between man and God. Let's say a guy commits an act of homosexuality, right? Or he does something else that's sexually usher, right? That's a sin between you and God. You have to make things good between you and God. There's been no other parties that have been hurt. And it's possible for a person to do tshuva, have remorse, do his confessional to Hashem, do whatever self-affliction he needs to do to atone, and he's totally forgiven. Tzorchei Rabim, we'll see. He says we'll see later on a little bit more about the details of Tzorchei Rabim. And then he says, who are the Rashi Hakol, the heads of the community who set up deputies to go around town? Hainu HaBeistin, he says that refers to the Beistin in the city. And Lahamid Mamunim, they should set up deputies. And he says, Kasef HaKesef HaKadoshim, this is one of the commentaries that's in the margin of the Shulchan Aruch. And he writes, the Zelo Shayach Achshav, he says, this does not apply anymore today. Shenital kol hatokef al amitus hamishpat meirashe am Yisrael. That we've had our teeth taken out. We have no teeth anymore. The Beis Din. We have no authority to be able to enforce law. Ve'ein kochenu ela b'peh. And therefore the only power of enforcement is the mouth. Right? Kishasholim she'ela eich lihitnaheg b'inyani ha'asur v'hamutar. All we can tell people is what is asur and what is mutter when they come and ask us, right? And it's a serious deviation from what used to be the norm, is that not only could we tell people what the halacha is when they asked us, but we could even proactively insert ourselves. The rabbinic leadership could insert themselves into people's businesses and say, "Hey, what you're doing is not okay." And that doesn't work anymore. It just doesn't happen. It's not possible. And morim lahem al pi Torah hakdosha. But today, when people ask us, we can answer the question based on what the Torah says. Ma'ayin sham sheherich bekam dvarim shel takanos ha'ir. And he says, I refer you to his commentary because he talks a lot about other kinds of remedies that a community leadership, a Beis Din, can make for the city. But the reality is that, for better or for worse, there's very little communal hold that a rabbinic body can have over its constituents. And it seems that there's a reason for it today, because if a rabbinic body would flex its muscles, people would just leave the community, right, and go down the road. I mean, today the power. I guess one example of where you still see a Beis Din exercising its power is when it comes to agunot. If a woman is a man and a woman get divorced, and the husband refuses to give her a get, so that's really the only time where we see that a Beit Din can flex its muscles, but even there are limitations, because a Beis Din can come out and say, so-and-so, Mr. So-and-so has refused to give his wife a get. We have a case like that here in town right now, that Mr. So-and-so has refused to give his wife a get, and no one should let him come and daven in your shul. So that's we just had a case like that, and I forwarded that email to the office and said, if Mr. So-and-so comes requesting tickets for the holidays, we have to turn him down, right? But even there, all it takes is one really, really friendly rabbi who says, you got to love all Jews, and he'll say, okay, come, you can come to my shul. And then that also breaks the power of the Beis Din. Okay. So this whole, so unfortunately, there's a certain sense of lawlessness, especially when it comes to business practices, and therefore that's why we're learning these halachas, because we can't do any more than just study them and try to do our best whenever we interact with other people. Okay. Okay. There's no shiur tomorrow morning. Just want to remind you. If everyone is okay, we'll pick it up on. Is everyone okay for Monday, on Som Gedalia, which is a fast day? Is everyone okay to learn?
Does Ralph remember what time the fast begins in the morning?
5:52, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay,
So
so we'll.
it's a
It
good
should be
time.
okay. Monday should be okay.
Yeah. So
So if we're fully satiated by then, if we choose to wake up early to eat, we'll be raring to learn.
okay, very good. So I would recommend that you wake up a few minutes earlier, have your coffee, have your breakfast, and then just come on to and then 6 o'clock we'll start this year. Okay.
6 o'clock or 6:30?
Oh, sorry, 6:30. My mistake. My mistake. Okay, Yud Zion. Unless you want to make it earlier on Monday because some people have to go to shul, right? So it's up to you. Although I think on Som Gedalia the minyan is at 6 and at 7, so it's not going to help you if we start at 6. So why don't we just keep it at 6:30? Okay. All right. Let's go on to Yud Zion. We'll actually just start it today. And as I mentioned to you, Yud Zion there's a law of that if something is considered to be an essential commodity, um, there is only so much, there's a restriction on how much profit you're allowed to make on essential commodities. You all remember that case of the guy who bought a pharmaceutical company or who bought a certain drug from a pharmaceutical company and then immediately inflated the price of that particular drug by about 500% or something, and because he had the corner on the market, and the government came down hard on him because people were no longer able to afford this drug, and for some people it was a wonder drug, and they lost all quality of life as a result of that. Anyone remember the details of that case? What was the name of that drug? I don't remember exactly, but any of the doctors remember what I'm talking about? Anyway, the point is that sometimes a commodity will be deemed to be essential, and as a result, there are limitations on how much profit you're allowed to make on that object, and that's what we're going to talk about now. In the times of when this was written, I don't think that drugs were included in that list of essential commodities, but today, perhaps that would be different. So he starts off by saying as follows: "V'chein chayavim lahamid memunim al hasha'arim, shelo yarviach kol echad ma sheyirtzeh." That it is necessary to appoint deputies, people who are in charge of the community standards, and these are people who watch the market, the indexes of various commodities, and they have to look at specific, all of the individual shopkeepers. Shelo yarviach kol echad ma sheyirtzeh, not to allow anyone to charge whatever he wants. Sha'asr la'adam laharviach b'dvarim sheyesh bahem chayei nefesh, kugon yenos shmonim uslatos ela hashtos. A person is not allowed to make a profit on essential consumable commodities, such as wine, oil, and flour. Those three are always listed in the Gemara as the essential commodities. I'm not sure if you remember there was a Gemara in Gittin about the city of Yerushalayim, and these commodities were listed as well. But wine, oil, and flour are the basic staples of every Jewish home, or every home essentially in the medieval world, because people didn't have free access to water, so their beverage at their table was wine. They needed oil with which to cook, and they needed flour with which to bake. And as long as you had those three, you were basically taken care of. Okay? So therefore, since these are essential commodities, you're not allowed to charge more than 1/6 milabar shu chomesh milagav, which is, using the calculation, it turns out to be really 20%, not just 16 and 2/3%, but it's 20% because it's using another method of calculation, where a sixth is really a fifth, because basically what you're saying is once you've added the fifth, you divide the commodity into 6 equal parts, and that would equal 20% of the total amount. Okay, so therefore you're not allowed to charge more than 20% profit. Now this is different from the laws of ona'ah. Remember, the laws of ona'ah, we learned at the very beginning, is essentially whatever fair market value is. You cannot go beyond fair market value beyond the sixth. But what we're saying over here is that let's say the market will bear whatever people would charge, or there's a commodity that doesn't have a specific fair market value, because let's say I have a corner on the market, so and there is no other competition, because let's say I'm the only guy in town. So what they have to do is they have to look at how much did you pay for the commodity, and even without the problem of ona'ah, we still, when it's essentials, we will restrict you from making more than 20% profit. V'chol hamafkia hashar umocher biyoker hareze kemalve biribis. He says if a person artificially inflates the price of an essential commodity by raising the prices so that he can make more profit, then such a person is no better than a person who lends money with interest. And just like the Torah prohibits lending money with interest, the Torah prohibits a person making a profit off of the backs of the consumers when it's an essential commodity. And why is that? Because the whole reason why the Torah says you're not allowed to lend money with interest, she'over al v'cheyachicha imach, is because the Torah says that the reason why you can't charge interest is because any kind of loan that has interest could bring another person to ruin. And so too, by raising the prices on essential commodities, you're going to bring ruin, financial ruin, and potentially even starvation to the people of the community that you serve. And therefore, you're not fulfilling the mandate of v'chei achicha ima, that you have to let your brother live with you. Live with you means that he has to be able to be able to survive in your community. Okay. So and therefore urishayim lahakoso ulaansho kifi haroilo, and therefore you can penalize him, you can even flog him, or you can assess him with financial penalties, as necessary as the Beis Din of the community deems to be appropriate. And again, largely this halacha doesn't really apply in the type of free enterprise economy that we have today, but the principle is the same. The principle basically is, just because a person has a monopoly on the market means that it does not allow him to exploit the public. He's got to make sure that he makes a profit, but at the same time, if it's an essential good, he's got to make sure that the community has access to it. And we'll elaborate on this halacha, Mirza Hashem, on Monday. Let me wish you all a ksiva v'chasima tova. Should be a good gebenched year for each and every one of you, and I hope we all have a lot of bracha for the coming year,
Amen.
and an end to a lot of the stuff. Okay, I'll take care. We'll speak to you soon.
Shkoyach, Rabbi.
Shana Tova, Rabbi.
Shana Tova.